Willow Creek was the kind of town where time moved slower and names lingered like the scent of pine sap in summer. Everyone knew everyone, and rumors moved faster than the mail truck, except when Franklin Hayes was on his bicycle. Franklin had been Willow Creek's postman for 26 years. He never spoke, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Born mute, he had lived his entire life in silence, but silence never meant invisibility. Each morning before dawn, Franklin unlocked the old brick post office on Maple Avenue. The air would still be cool, dew clinging to the windows like breath held too long. Inside, he worked by habit and feel, sorting letters, aligning envelopes, stamping outgoing mail with the precision of a clockmaker. He greeted the mail with reverence, as if each letter carried more than ink: secrets, confessions, birthday wishes, regrets, declarations of love. And in this small town, he was trusted not just to deliver, but to hold those fragile pieces of human truth with care. Franklin wasn't just the mute postman. He was Frank, the man who always brought dog biscuits for the retrievers on Hillside Street. The man who helped old Mrs. Trimble fix her gate when a latch came loose. The man who once rode 5 miles out of his route to deliver an acceptance letter to a boy applying for college. Without words, he told people they mattered. Children loved him. He would lift his cap with a grin and hand them envelopes as if they were precious gifts. Parents admired him. Elderly folks relied on him. Even the sheriff nodded with quiet respect whenever they crossed paths. And yet, despite the town's love for him, no one really knew where Franklin went after work. He lived alone in a modest cabin near the woods. He didn't attend church, rarely shopped in town, and his evenings were spent reading by lantern light or scribbling in his weathered black notebook, his way of speaking to himself, or perhaps to no one. But Franklin had a secret, one no one in town knew, and it lived not in his notebook, but in a small tin box buried beneath the floorboards of the post office. He hadn't planned to keep the letter. In fact, when Eleanor Grace handed it to him, her fingers shaking, he had nodded solemnly and tucked it into his satchel like every other piece of mail he'd ever carried. But something in her eyes had stopped him. Not fear, not desperation, conviction. "Franklin," she had said, voice low, "this has to reach Sheriff Nolan. No one else. Promise me." He had promised. She had kissed him on the cheek, unexpected, soft, trembling. Then she turned and walked away, her hair trailing behind her like a flame. That was the last time he saw her. 2 days later, Eleanor Grace vanished. The mayor, her father, claimed she had run off. Said she'd been writing letters to someone in California. Said she was dramatic, impetuous, just like her mother. The town didn't question it, at least not loudly. Franklin did. He read the letter that night, forgoing his usual rules. He had never opened mail before, but he had to know. What he found inside twisted his stomach and chilled his bones. It wasn't a love letter. It was a warning, a detailed confession. Eleanor had discovered something. City funds being diverted, a cover-up, illegal land deals tied to her father's office. She feared for her life. "If anything happens to me," she had written, "this letter is the truth." Franklin sat in the dark for hours, the letter trembling in his hand. Delivering it would mean going to the sheriff. Trusting someone. Risking everything. But if the mayor had already seen this coming, who else might be watching? He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he sealed the letter in wax again, wrapped it in parchment, and hid it in a tin box beneath the post office floor. He would wait for the right moment. But the moment never came. 2 weeks later, Franklin Hayes disappeared. Willow Creek was not a place for secrets. Whispers traveled faster than trains, and if you sneezed on Main Street, someone on Pine Avenue would bless you before noon. And yet, Eleanor Grace had managed to keep something hidden, something so dangerous, so fragile, that it could upend everything her family stood for. She had meant to uncover it. Not at first. It had started with a missing scholarship check at the Community Foundation. She volunteered there after school, organizing forms, licking envelopes, helping seniors fill out grant paperwork. It was boring, thankless work, but she liked it. It gave her purpose. Until one day, a spreadsheet didn't add up. Then two. Then she found a letter, one that was meant to be shredded. It mentioned a land acquisition deal between the town's mayor and a mining company from out of state. But the land had been zoned for public housing. She dug deeper. Within weeks, she had pieced it together. The mining deal, the missing scholarships, the fake invoices, it all led back to her father, Mayor Lawrence Grace. She didn't want to believe it. She'd idolized him once. Her mother had died young, and Lawrence had raised her alone with strict rules and a stiff upper lip. But he had built this town, or so she thought. When she confronted him, trembling, holding the printed documents, his reaction wasn't denial. It was silence. Cold, hard silence. Then came the words she never forgot. "You think you understand the world, Eleanor, but you don't. These people don't need dreams. They need control. And I won't let you destroy that with your bleeding heart." He called her ungrateful, foolish, emotional. Then he told her to forget what she'd seen. But she wouldn't. That night, she sat at her desk, writing longhand in careful, slanted ink. She listed everything she knew, dates, names, bank accounts, altered records. And then she wrote the most terrifying words of all. "If anything happens to me, this letter is the truth." It is not a cry for attention. It is evidence. She didn't know who to trust. Not the police. They reported to her father. Not her classmates. They wouldn't believe her. And certainly not the mayor's inner circle. But there was one person, Franklin Hayes, the silent postman who always looked her in the eyes when everyone else talked over her. The man who had once waited an hour outside her house in the snow when she forgot to pick up a package. He was quiet, steady, incorruptible. She folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and placed it in a hand-addressed envelope. To Sheriff Nolan, urgent. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Eleanor stood by the gate, waiting for Franklin. Her coat was too thin for the frost, and her hands trembled inside her sleeves. When his bicycle rounded the corner, she stepped forward quickly. Franklin dismounted, tipped his cap, and reached for the mailbag. "No letters today," she said softly, "but I have something for you." She handed him the envelope. Their eyes met. "Please," she whispered, "make sure he gets it. Don't let my father see it. It's important." Franklin blinked once and gave a solemn nod, tucking the envelope safely away. She almost smiled. Almost. Then, impulsively, she kissed him on the cheek. Not out of romance, but out of trust. Out of desperation. And just like that, she turned and walked back inside. That night, her father didn't come home for dinner. Two men she didn't recognize arrived instead. Friends of the family, they claimed. She was told to stay in her room. She heard hushed voices, the sound of a phone slamming down, footsteps pacing for hours. The next morning, she was gone. At least, that was the story. Mayor Grace announced to the town that Eleanor had left a note, that she'd eloped with a boy from college and was starting a new life out west. There was no note, only silence. And Franklin never came to deliver mail to the Grace residence again. Franklin Hayes had delivered tens of thousands of letters in his lifetime. Never lost one, never opened one, until Eleanor's. He sat by candlelight in his small cabin tucked at the edge of the forest, rereading the letter for the 6th time. His calloused fingers trembled as he folded the paper along its already worn creases. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, but the real storm was unfolding within him. The envelope sat on his desk, resealed with fresh wax, addressed to Sheriff Nolan. But something kept him from delivering it. Fear. Eleanor was gone. Everyone in town accepted the mayor's version of events, but Franklin knew Eleanor hadn't run. She had faced her father with fire in her voice and purpose in her heart. She was brave, but not reckless. And now so was he. At least he hoped. For the first time in his life, Franklin felt the crushing weight of knowing too much. That week, he noticed things. Small things. The air felt heavier. Two men loitered across the street from the post office one morning. Neither carried mail nor spoke. Their eyes followed him. They disappeared when Sheriff Nolan came by, but reappeared the next day. At the general store, Mr. Cobbs hesitated when handing him change, glancing at Franklin's satchel like it held gold. Even his usual route felt different. The neighbor's dog on Cedar Lane, always playful, barked with anxiety as Franklin passed. The paperboy's father avoided eye contact. Something had shifted. Franklin understood then that Eleanor's enemies were watching. Maybe not the entire town, but enough to keep him cornered in silence. He couldn't go to the sheriff directly. He was being followed. And he couldn't trust the mail system now, not even his own satchel. If the letter was intercepted, it would vanish forever. So, one night he made a choice. He pried up the floorboards beneath the post office's sorting table, right where the wood had warped slightly. He slid the letter into a tin box, wrapped it in wax paper, then nailed the planks back down. It would be safe, hidden, until the time was right. That same night, Franklin sat at his desk, staring at the corner of his journal, where he had written, "If you find this, it means I failed." He hesitated, pen in hand. What else could he write? There were no answers, only consequences. The next morning, he didn't report for work. That afternoon, his bicycle was found propped against the post office wall. His mailbag sat neatly on the front steps of his cabin, untouched, full of letters destined for nowhere. No note, no bouvier. No one saw Franklin Hayes again. The town mourned him in their own quiet way. The mayor called it a tragedy. Franklin was troubled, he said. He probably couldn't handle Eleanor's disappearance. Sheriff Nolan seemed unconvinced, but had no evidence of foul play. No signs of a struggle. Nothing missing. Just absence. The town whispered. Some said Franklin ran because he knew something. Others claimed he had followed Eleanor. A few insisted he had simply snapped, his silence finally consuming him. But the truth sat undisturbed, hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped in wax and waiting. Liam Barnes had never believed in ghost stories. Not really. Sure, he liked to spook his friends by sneaking into the abandoned post office on dares. He even claimed he'd once heard the creak of Franklin Hayes's bicycle on a quiet summer night. But that was just for effect. Ghosts didn't exist. Secrets, though, those were real. And Willow Creek had plenty of them. It was a gray Saturday afternoon when Liam found himself standing in front of the old post office again. The building had been locked and left to rot for decades, the red paint on its wooden trim peeling like dried scabs. The windows were cloudy with grime. A faded sign still hung crookedly by a single nail. U.S. Postal Service, Willow Creek. "But you can't get inside," taunted Jacob, Liam's classmate and self-appointed rival. "Bet you're scared." Liam rolled his eyes. "Watch me." The truth was, Liam was scared, just a little. Everyone knew the place was haunted. Kids whispered that if you listened closely, you could hear Franklin Hayes's footsteps on the cracked floorboards, carrying the last letter he never delivered. But fear had never stopped Liam from proving himself. He pushed open the back door, which was barely held together by rusted hinges, and stepped into the darkness. The inside smelled of mold and dust, mixed with the faint metallic tang of rust. Moonlight, slipping through holes in the roof, lit up streaks of dust in the air. Liam's sneakers squeaked as he walked across the warped wooden floor. The sorting table stood like an altar at the center of the room. His flashlight's beam revealed dozens of old pigeonholes, still stuffed with papers that had long yellowed. Cobwebs clung to every corner. It was while poking around the far side of the table that Liam noticed something odd. The floorboard beneath his foot gave a dull thunk, different from the others. "Hello." He crouched, pressing his ear close. Sure enough, there was space underneath. "Bingo," he muttered. Grabbing the crowbar he'd brought, Liam came prepared for dares. He wedged it under the plank. It took 3 tries, but the board finally came loose with a groan, as though the building itself was protesting. Inside the gap sat a tin box, about the size of a lunch pail. The lid was coated in rust, and when he pried it open, a puff of dust filled the air. Inside, wrapped in brittle wax paper, was a single envelope. The paper was yellowed, the corners curled with age. Across the front, in fading ink, were the words, "To Sheriff Nolan, urgent." And in the corner, just barely legible, was a return address, Eleanor Grace. Liam felt a thrill. He didn't know who Eleanor Grace was, but his mother always told stories about the Grace family. How the mayor's mansion was the oldest building in town, how the Grace name was tied to everything from the library to the high school gym. Whoever Eleanor was, this letter must have been important. Why had it been hidden for so long? He slipped it into his backpack and hurried home. When his mother, Caroline Barnes, saw it, Her face went pale. She held the envelope like it was radioactive. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "The post office," Liam said, shrugging. "It's just an old letter." Her eyes darted to the name on the return address. Eleanor Grace. Oh my God. She pressed the letter to her chest, as though trying to decide what to do. "What's the big deal?" Liam asked. "Is she, like, famous or something?" Caroline's voice trembled. "Eleanor Grace was the mayor's daughter. She disappeared when I was your age. No one ever found her." Liam blinked. "So what's in the letter?" Caroline didn't answer. She turned it over, running her finger along the wax seal. "It hasn't been opened," she murmured. "After 40 years." Her hand shook. She set it down. "Liam, you need to put this back. Right now. You shouldn't have taken it." But it was already too late. Word spread fast in Willow Creek. By evening, Caroline's phone had rung 4 times. Neighbors, old friends, even Mr. Howe for the hardware store, each asking if they'd heard the rumor. By nightfall, a black sedan rolled slowly past their house. Liam saw it from his bedroom window. 2 men inside, faces shadowed. One of them looked directly at him, and something in that stare sent a chill down his spine. The next morning, the mayor's office called. Mayor Thomas Grace, the son of Lawrence Grace, wanted to discuss the letter. Caroline refused to hand it over. "This belongs to the sheriff," she said. "If it's evidence, it should go to law enforcement." But before they could drive to the sheriff's station, the sedan returned. The men got out. Liam didn't wait to see what they wanted. He grabbed his backpack, stuffed the letter inside, and bolted out the back door. Rain was pouring by the time Liam sprinted down Maple Avenue. His sneakers slapped against the wet pavement, heart thundering in his chest. He could hear shouts behind him, his mother calling his name, one of the men yelling to stop. He didn't stop. He cut across the park, through the overgrown lot, and straight into the abandoned post office. The door slammed behind him. He pressed his back against it, breathing hard. The envelope in his backpack felt heavier than ever, as if Eleanor's voice, silent for 40 years, was trying to speak through it. The rain hadn't let up when Liam climbed out through a side window of the old post office, clutching his backpack tight. His soaked hoodie clung to his back, and every step squelched with water, but he didn't slow down. He didn't head home. He didn't trust the police. He didn't even go to the library, his usual safe haven. He ran straight to the person who had once said, "History isn't in books, it's in people's silences." Mrs. Ellis. At 74, Mrs. Mabel Ellis still lived in the same white Victorian house where she'd been born. It stood just behind the church on Holly Street, wrapped in ivy and memories. Her front porch light was always on, even in stormy weather. That night, it was the only warm glow Liam could see through the downpour. He knocked with urgency. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Ellis appeared in her shawl and slippers. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat braid, and her brows furrowed the moment she saw him. "Liam? What on earth?" "I need your help," he gasped. "I found something." She sat him by the fireplace with a towel over his shoulders and a hot mug of peppermint tea in his hands. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air, mingled with old books and ink. Liam was shivering, but his grip didn't loosen on the backpack. "Slow down," she said gently. "What happened?" He opened the bag and carefully pulled out the wax-sealed envelope. The fire's flicker caught the gold-embossed return address, Eleanor Grace. Mrs. Ellis gasped. She covered her mouth. Her eyes welled with tears before Liam even explained. "I found it in the old post office," he said. "It was under the floorboards." She reached out as though touching a ghost. "My God, after all these years." "You knew her?" Liam asked. Mrs. Ellis nodded slowly. "Eleanor was my student, brightest I ever taught, and the bravest." She took the letter into her hands. "We all knew something wasn't right. We just didn't know what. Or maybe we were too afraid to look." She stared at the seal for a long time before finally breaking it. The silence in the room was so thick Liam could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall. As Mrs. Ellis read, Her face changed, soft nostalgia giving way to horror, then disbelief, then grief. She closed the letter with trembling fingers. She tried to stop them. She whispered. She knew what her father was doing. What did he do? Liam asked. Mrs. Ellis looked into the fire. Lawrence Grace wasn't just the mayor. He was the most powerful man this town had ever seen. Behind the charm and church donations, there was corruption. He sold public land to corporations, covered up a factory accident that killed 3 workers, stole from scholarship funds meant for underprivileged kids. Liam blinked. Eleanor found out. She was going to blow the whistle. This letter, she held it gently. It was her last hope. And Franklin? Liam asked. Mrs. Ellis's voice caught. He was the only person she trusted. The only one she knew couldn't be bought. He must have tried to protect this. She told him to give it to Sheriff Nolan, Liam said. But he never did. He must have been followed, Mrs. Ellis murmured. Threatened, or worse. She stood suddenly and disappeared into the hallway. Liam sat in silence, listening to the creaks of the old house. A few minutes later, she returned with an old yearbook and a photograph in a silver frame. The photo showed 3 people. A younger Mrs. Ellis, Eleanor Grace, and Franklin Hayes, standing in front of the old post office, arms around each other, smiling. He couldn't speak, she said, brushing dust from the frame, but he understood more than anyone in town. Eleanor trusted him with her life. Liam leaned closer. They look happy. Mrs. Ellis nodded. Before things changed, she turned toward the mantel, placed the photo gently, and then looked back at him. Liam, we can't keep this quiet. He stiffened. I know, but there were men at my house. They were trying to take the letter. My mom's scared. I am scared. She placed a firm hand on his shoulder. That's how power stays buried. Fear. But fear fades. The truth doesn't. She walked over to a drawer and pulled out a phone. Sheriff Nolan is retired, but I still have his number. If there's anyone who will take this seriously, it's him. She made the call. As she spoke, Liam stared at the flickering letter on the table, the broken wax seal now limp. The room felt heavier. The story of Eleanor Grace, once erased, was beginning to speak again. That night, Mrs. Ellis made Liam sleep in the guest room, promising to contact his mother in the morning. Liam lay awake for hours, the rain tapping against the window like fingers. The photo of Eleanor, Franklin, and Mrs. Ellis still sat on the mantel. At some point past midnight, he sat up, took out his notebook, and scribbled. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. The sound of gravel crunching under old tires stirred something deep in Mrs. Ellis's chest. As the faded blue pickup came to a stop in her driveway, Liam pressed his face to the window, heart racing. Sheriff Nolan hadn't worn a badge in over 15 years, but the way he stepped out of the truck, slow, deliberate, watchful, he still carried the weight of one. He was in his 70s now, taller than Liam expected, his posture a little bent, but his presence solid. His silver mustache twitched as he spotted Mrs. Ellis waiting at the porch, Eleanor Grace's letter held delicately in her hands. Mabel, he said with a quiet nod. His voice was gravelly but warm. Thank you for coming, Tom, she said. I know it's been a long time. He glanced toward the boy hovering behind her. And this must be the one who found the letter. Liam stepped forward. Liam Barnes, sir. Nolan offered a firm handshake. You've done something important, son. Something brave. He took the letter carefully and opened it without hesitation. As his eyes scanned the contents, his expression barely changed, except for a faint tightening around the corners of his mouth. When he finished, he looked up and said only one word. I knew it. Inside, the 3 sat at Mrs. Ellis's kitchen table, where so many student essays and community letters had once been edited with red ink and gentle encouragement. Sheriff Nolan leaned back in the wooden chair, the envelope between his hands like a piece of old dynamite. I always thought her disappearance was wrong. Everything about it. Lawrence Grace told me she'd left town with a college boyfriend, but I'd never met the boy, never saw a letter. And Franklin? He shook his head. I knew Franklin for most of my life. He wasn't just some quiet mailman. He saw things others missed. Knew how to listen, really listen. The day he vanished, something inside me said he didn't leave by choice. Mrs. Ellis nodded. But you couldn't do anything. I had nothing but gut feelings, Nolan admitted. The mayor had friends in the state capitol, and the town council followed him like sheep. If I pushed harder, I'd have lost my badge, or worse. He looked at the letter again. But this is something. Liam leaned forward. So what happens now? We go to the police? Sheriff Nolan hesitated. We'll have to be careful. Thomas Grace is mayor now, and he's as protective of his father's legacy as the old man was of his seat. But this proves his father was guilty, Liam said. It proves Eleanor was afraid, Nolan corrected gently. It proves she knew something. But legally? It's not enough. Not yet. Mrs. Ellis folded her hands. So we dig. Nolan nodded. We dig. And we start by reopening the files. He pulled out a worn leather notebook and set on the table. The cover was cracked, but the pages inside were still intact. Case notes, sketches, clippings. I kept copies of everything, he said, even when I wasn't allowed to. He flipped to a tab marked E.g. Missing Person Report, Eleanor Grace. Last seen, March 12, 1985. Filed by Mayor Lawrence Grace. No note confirmed. No personal items taken. No verified witness to departure. Then another page. Incident Report, Franklin Hayes. Last seen, March 27, 1985. Bicycle and mailbag recovered. No signs of struggle. Disappearance presumed voluntary. 2 weeks apart, Nolan said. I always felt they were connected, but no one wanted to believe me. Mrs. Ellis poured tea for the table. So it's changed? Nolan looked at Liam. That kid pulled the truth out of the floorboards. That changes everything. That afternoon, they returned to the post office. Nolan had a key, an old brass skeleton key that still worked after all those years. The door creaked open, releasing a musty scent of paper, dust, and time. The tin box was still under the floor, and inside, tucked beneath the original envelope, was something else no one had noticed. A second sheet of paper, folded, smudged with oil, and written in Franklin's tidy hand. Nolan held it up. To whoever finds this, it read. I couldn't deliver it. They were watching. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm sorry, Mabel. I did what I could. If I disappear, no, it wasn't by choice. F.H. Liam stared. He knew they were coming for him. Nolan exhaled sharply. And now, we have more than a letter. They spent the rest of the evening combing through the abandoned post office. Nolan gathered old schedules, logbooks, mail logs from 1985. He took photos of the tin box, the handwriting, and Eleanor's original envelope. At sunset, they stepped back outside. The town looked quiet, but it felt different now, like the wind itself was stirring with unearthed truth. Willow Creek hadn't seen a state investigator in town since the drought riots of '73, and back then, they'd sent someone from agriculture. This time, it wasn't about crops or budgets. It was about bones buried in silence. Detective Abigail Anders arrived 3 days after Nolan's call. She was tall, composed, and younger than anyone expected. Mid-30s, tightly coiled hair, blazer still crisp from the drive. Her eyes didn't miss a thing. She stepped out of her black sedan and met Nolan outside the sheriff's office, now used mainly for storing old traffic cones and busted radios. You really think this is a 40-year cover-up? She asked without introduction. I don't think, Nolan said. I know. She raised an eyebrow. Then let's get to work. Word spread like wildfire the moment Anders walked into town hall. Mayor Thomas Grace, flanked by his personal assistant and 2 council members, tried to play it cool, offering her coffee and a folder of historical documents that suspiciously omitted the year 1985. She skimmed the pages, unimpressed. I'm here for the files you don't hand out, she said, eyes fixed on Thomas. There's nothing to hide, he said, voice too smooth. My father's tenure was one of progress. Eleanor's disappearance was personal. Family matters should stay that way. Anders gave a cold smile. Miss Grace reported a government crime in this letter. That's not family business. That's criminal obstruction. Possibly conspiracy. Thomas's jaw tightened. Those are heavy accusations. They're not accusations yet, she cut in. But if you keep stonewalling me, I'll get a warrant. I prefer not to. And with that, she walked out, leaving the mayor pale and visibly shaken. Meanwhile, Liam and Mrs. Ellis watched the scene unfold from a bench outside the bakery. "She's not playing around," Liam whispered. "No," Mrs. Ellis said, nodding with approval. "And thank God for that." Back at her house, they joined Sheriff Nolan to assemble a timeline. Eleanor's last movements, Franklin's disappearance, financial irregularities, and the people who had worked at the mill back then. The same mill Eleanor had tried to expose. One name came up more than once. Raymond Dillard, a maintenance worker who'd quit suddenly a month after Eleanor vanished. He lived out near the train tracks in a trailer surrounded by broken lawnmowers and empty bird feeders. Nolan paid him a visit. Raymond opened the door with a wheeze and a cough. He looked older than his 63 years, his face weathered, eyes hollow. When he saw Nolan, he hesitated. "I thought they'd forgotten about me." "They haven't," Nolan said. "Neither have we." Raymond looked down at the ground, his hand still on the doorknob. "I tried to forget. God knows I tried. Tell me what you saw." Raymond's lips trembled. "I saw Eleanor that night. She wasn't with no boyfriend. She came down to the mill after closing. Said she needed to talk to one of the foremen, gathering proof, she said. I told her it was dangerous, but she didn't care." "And then?" Nolan asked. "She never came out." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Two men left later. One of them was from town hall. I recognized the car." "Did you say anything?" Raymond shook his head. "I knew what had happened. Back then, you didn't cross the Graces. I kept my mouth shut. Quit a month later and never stepped foot in that place again." "Would you testify?" Nolan asked. Raymond hesitated for a long time, then nodded. "I owe her that much." The next day, Nolan and Anders stood at the site of the old Willow Creek Mill, now an abandoned husk, rusting under time. The walls were covered in graffiti. Broken glass crunched underfoot. Vines had crept through every crack. They brought cadaver dogs and forensic teams. By sunset, they found what looked like disturbed earth behind the building, near the foundation. The work lights buzzed under the darkening sky. Anders knelt beside the excavation crew as bone fragments emerged from the soil, small, human, wrapped in something like fabric. A necklace followed, tarnished silver, shaped like a leaf. Nolan's hand went to his chest. "She wore that every day." Anders looked grim. "We'll run DNA, but this might be our girl." Back in town, the news spread faster than the storm rolling in. Mayor Thomas Grace held an emergency press conference, sweating under the cameras. "These recent findings are inconclusive," he said. "We believe in justice, but we also believe in due process." But no one believed him. Not anymore. Local reporter Katie Holt from the Willow Creek Gazette published a front-page story the next morning. "Bones found at mill. Is this Eleanor Grace?" Underneath was a side column. "Franklin Hayes, the mute postman who tried to tell the truth." Liam read it at the kitchen table, his heart pounding. For the first time, Franklin had a voice, through ink, through paper, through him. The first sign something was wrong came with the smell. Mrs. Ellis had always kept her home scented with lavender, but when Liam opened the front door that morning, he was greeted with the sharp sting of burned paper. "Mrs. Ellis?" he called. No answer. He ran through the hallway, heart hammering, into the study. Papers were scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Her bookshelves had been ransacked, drawers pulled from their cabinets, their contents dumped in messy heaps. And on the desk, where the letter from Eleanor and Franklin's final note had rested just hours ago, there was only ash. The documents had been set on fire, but the flame hadn't finished the job. A corner of Eleanor's handwriting remained, charred at the edges. Mrs. Ellis emerged from the back garden, pale and trembling, her shawl stained with soil. "I was only outside for 15 minutes, she said, her voice shaking. "I was pulling weeds. I didn't hear a thing." Liam helped her sit down, offered her water, but she barely touched it. "They were watching the house," she whispered, "waiting for me to be alone." She looked at the scattered mess. "They want the truth buried again, just like her." Sheriff Nolan arrived within minutes. He examined the damage carefully, taking photos, bagging the half-burnt papers. They were looking for something specific. They didn't trash everything, only what we've been working on. He held up the partial remains of Franklin's note, blackened but salvageable. "They didn't get it all," he said, but the fear in Mrs. Ellis's eyes lingered. "What if they come back?" They won't, Nolan said. Not while I'm breathing. Still, that night, Mrs. Ellis locked her doors for the first time in years, and Liam slept with a baseball bat beside his bed. The next day, a note appeared in Liam's locker at school, folded 3 times. No name, just a single line. Stop digging before you're buried, too. His hands went clammy. He looked around the hallway. Everyone seemed normal. Talking, laughing, unaware. But someone had put it there. He didn't tell anyone, not even Mrs. Ellis. But he started checking over his shoulder more often. That evening, news came in from the state lab. DNA confirmed the remains found behind the mill belonged to Eleanor Grace. The necklace, the bones, the fabric, it all matched. For 40 years, she had been buried under dirt and silence. The town reeled. Vigils were held. Candles flickered along the sidewalks. But under the grief was something darker: fear, anger, and shame. Some residents said justice was finally coming. Others said it was time to move on. Mayor Thomas Grace, standing behind a podium with trembling hands, announced a memorial fund in his aunt's name. He didn't mention the investigation, or the body, or the letter, but people were watching, and not all of them were on his side anymore. Katie Holt, the Willow Creek Gazette reporter, published a front-page editorial the next morning. We must ask ourselves, who benefited from Eleanor's silence? Who kept Franklin's truth from being heard? And who still wants this buried? Her article included photos of Eleanor's recovered necklace, a scanned copy of Franklin's note, and, most damning of all, a blurred photo of the car parked outside Mrs. Ellis's home the night of the break-in. One of the councilmen recognized the plate. It belonged to Stan Brewer, the mayor's longtime advisor and former factory board member. Detective Anders, reading the article over coffee at the diner, leaned across the table to Sheriff Nolan. "We're close," she said. "They're panicking." He nodded, which means someone's about to make a mistake. Meanwhile, Liam couldn't shake the feeling he was being followed. On his walk home from school, he noticed a silver sedan behind him, keeping a slow, steady pace. When he turned, it sped up and passed, but the driver never made eye contact. Later that night, he found muddy footprints outside his window. He told Mrs. Ellis. She didn't hesitate. "You're not staying here tonight." Sheriff Nolan moved them both into a secure room at the local church, where the pastor was an old friend. It wasn't a bunker, but it was safer. Inside the quiet room, surrounded by hymnals and emergency lanterns, Mrs. Ellis reached into her bag and revealed something she hadn't shown before. A journal, worn, leather-bound, marked with the initials E.G. "She gave this to me the week before she disappeared," Mrs. Ellis whispered. "Told me not to read it unless something happened to her. I forgot about it, buried it in a box of old lesson plans. But now, they opened it together. Inside were entries, some mundane, thoughts on school, her frustration with her father's politics, but others were chilling. Dad had men watching the mill again. I think he's nervous. Franklin saw the trucks. He knows something's wrong, but he won't say it. He just looks at me like he's afraid. If this goes public, it'll ruin him. Maybe that's why he keeps asking where I'm going. I don't feel safe anymore." And finally, dated one day before she vanished. "Franklin will deliver the letter. If he doesn't, then something happened." Liam looked up. This changes everything. The next town hall meeting was standing room only. What had once been sleepy Wednesday evenings with coffee urns and quiet nods had become charged, buzzing with tension. Citizens packed into the narrow chamber, their eyes no longer passive but alert, watchful. Mayor Thomas Grace adjusted his tie for the 4th time. Behind him, a portrait of his father loomed on the wall, frozen in self-satisfied smile, hand resting on a miniature model of Willow Creek. Beside the podium stood Detective Anders, arms folded. Sheriff Nolan leaned against the back wall, not bothering to hide his scowl. Katie Holt, front row, tapped her pen against a notepad. Her recorder was live. Thomas stepped to the mic. "I understand emotions are high," he began, "but we must remember, investigations take time. We cannot rush to judgment based on speculation, or is it speculation that my cousin worked the mill and never got paid what he was owed?" A woman shouted. "Is it speculation that you had a man break into a schoolteacher's house?" Another voice barked. "Where's Franklin Hayes, huh? Still gonna say he ran off?" Someone near the back yelled. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Thomas tried to keep his composure. The council is cooperating fully with state investigators. Anders stepped forward. That's not true. Gasps spread through the room like fire. I asked for records of public land sales, council meeting minutes from 1984, and personnel files related to the mill, she said. Mayor Grace's office denied access to all three. Katie Holt stood up. So what's he hiding? Before Thomas could respond, a new voice cut through the noise. I have something to say. All heads turned as an older black woman walked to the front, her posture firm despite her cane. My name is Louise Carter, she said, and I worked in the Grace household for nearly 20 years. Even Thomas looked stunned. I was there the night Eleanor disappeared, Louise continued. I overheard a conversation between the mayor and two men. He was furious, said she'd gone too far this time, that she was going to destroy everything. He told them to take care of it. She turned, eyes hard, and then she was gone. Silence fell like a hammer. Thomas's face turned to stone. I try to forget, Louise said, but now I can't stay silent. That night, the town of Willow Creek began to fracture. Some defended the Grace family, citing years of leadership and prosperity. But many more began to see the truth, that their peace had been built on silence. Graffiti appeared on the wall of City Hall the next morning. Justice for Eleanor. Justice for Franklin. And in the middle of it all, Liam and Sheriff Nolan stood on the porch of Franklin Hayes' long-abandoned cabin, a small structure swallowed by ivy and pine. The cabin was eerily preserved. Dust blanketed the furniture. Spiderwebs stretched across the corners like a forgotten shroud. But there were no signs of forced entry, no looting, no vandalism. Liam wandered through, his flashlight beam bouncing off picture frames and shelves filled with books, mostly biographies, local history, and postal manuals. It wasn't until he stepped into the back room that he saw it. A large bulletin board. Pinned to it were newspaper clippings, notes in Franklin's handwriting, and, most haunting of all, a hand-drawn map of Willow Creek. Several places were circled in red. The mill, the post office, City Hall. But one circle stood out, a remote spot in the woods near the edge of the river. Next to it, Franklin had scrawled, Old Station Access Tunnel. Liam called for Nolan. The sheriff stared at the map, his brows pulling tight. There used to be a water pump station down there. It was sealed off after the flood in '79. Long forgotten. Why would he mark it? Liam asked. I don't know, Nolan said. But maybe that's where he was taken. Within hours, they were on their way. Liam, Nolan, Anders, and 2 state troopers. The trail was rough, overgrown, and soaked from the previous storm, but the air crackled with urgency. They reached the old access point just before dusk. It was almost hidden, an iron hatch buried under moss and leaves. Anders and Nolan pried it open. The rusted hinges screamed as the door lifted, revealing a steep staircase leading into darkness. They descended, flashlights in hand, boots echoing against stone. At the bottom was a narrow corridor, part of the old utility tunnel network. Cold air swirled. The walls were damp, lined with crumbling brick and rusted pipes. And then they saw it. A small room, sealed off by a heavy steel door. It took nearly 20 minutes to break through. Inside, remnants of a cot, an empty water jug, and scraps of what looked like old mail bags. And in the far corner, barely visible in the light, a jacket. Faded blue, a USPS patch barely holding on, and pinned to the collar, a name tag. Hayes. F. Nolan knelt beside it. His hand trembled. He was here. Liam whispered. Do you think they kept him here? Anders looked grim. Or worse. There were no signs of a body. No bonus. But evidence was enough to suggest Franklin Hayes had been imprisoned, hidden away in the dark, silenced more completely than ever before. The town of Willow Creek woke to sirens. Not the wailing kind, but the digital kind. Phones buzzed. Emails pinged. Notifications stacked like bricks. The entire inbox of Mayor Thomas Grace had been leaked to the public. Every scanned contract, every concealed land deal, every message marked confidential between Grace and his father's old allies had been dumped onto a shared server and sent to every media outlet in Colorado. At the center of it all was one folder. Eleanor_G, suppress files. Inside were letters her father had intercepted, confidential statements Eleanor had collected, a scanned image of the original letter Franklin had tried to deliver, complete with Eleanor's handwriting, matching the note she had written in her journal. The media descended like a storm, and for once, Willow Creek didn't hide. By noon, Mayor Grace had been arrested. He was led out of City Hall in cuffs, eyes downcast, flanked by state troopers. A crowd had gathered, silent at first, then slowly breaking into scattered applause. Louise Carter stood in front, head held high. "I hope she's watching," she whispered. At the post office, now unboarded and clean for the first time in decades, Detective Anders and Sheriff Nolan prepared a final press briefing. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Cameramen jostled for angles. Nolan held up Franklin's mailbag, recovered from the pump station. "It's official," he said. "After 4 decades, the investigation into Eleanor Grace's murder and Franklin Hayes' disappearance is closed." He paused. But the truth doesn't rest in case files. It lives in the courage of those who never stopped looking. He turned to Liam, and those who refused to be silenced. Liam was quiet during most of the ceremony. He didn't want speeches. He didn't want cameras. He just wanted answers. So when the technicians from the forensics team returned the jacket found in the tunnel, cleaned and preserved, he asked to be alone with it. Mrs. Ellis brought it to him in a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "There's something inside," she said softly. "In the lining." Liam opened it carefully. Hidden behind the seam, sewn in tightly, was a folded piece of paper, weathered, stained with time, but still intact. A final letter. Franklin's handwriting was as careful as ever. "If anyone finds this, then the silence is finally broken. I did not leave. I did not run. They came for me after Eleanor disappeared. I don't know what happened to her, but I know it wasn't her choice. They asked me for the letter. I didn't give it to them. I buried it instead. And now I'm buried, too. But I'd do it again. I've never spoken, but I've listened all my life. I've heard secrets on doorsteps, tears in mailboxes, hopes sealed in envelopes. If you're reading this, you are my voice now. Please, deliver the truth." Franklin Hayes. Liam read it 3 times before showing anyone else. And then, the next morning, he stood in front of the whole town, school children, teachers, shopkeepers, reporters, families, council members, and read it aloud. No one moved. When he finished, he folded the letter and said only one thing. He never spoke a word, but he said more than any of us ever did. A month later, a statue was unveiled outside the new town library. It was modest, just Franklin, standing with his mailbag, his hand holding out an envelope. Next to him, on a stone bench, sat a young woman in a skirt and denim jacket. Eleanor, smiling, frozen in bronze, forever reaching for the letter that had finally been delivered. Engraved on the base were the words, "Truth always finds its voice." Liam didn't go back to the post office right away. It felt sacred somehow, like a church that had finally heard its last confession. But one Saturday morning, Mrs. Ellis invited him to visit. They entered quietly. The floors had been repaired, the dust swept away. A mural now covered the back wall, a painting of Franklin on his bicycle, wind in his coat, eyes full of quiet determination. Liam stood in front of the sorting table, the very place where he'd found the tin box. "Think you'll ever deliver mail?" Mrs. Ellis asked with a smile. Liam shook his head. "No." He turned toward her. "But I'll never stop delivering the truth." She nodded. "That's more than enough." Epilogue. The story of Franklin Hayes and Eleanor Grace spread far beyond Willow Creek. News outlets ran documentaries. The town's high school renamed its journalism program after Eleanor. And the post office, long abandoned, was turned into a historical museum. Visitors came from across the state to read Franklin's final letter. But for those who lived in Willow Creek, the most powerful change wasn't in the monuments. It was in the way they spoke to each other. People paused now, listened longer, paid attention to what wasn't said. Because in the end, the mute postman had taught them a lesson louder than words. Silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means resistance. Sometimes it means love. And sometimes it's just waiting for someone brave enough to listen.